respective mandates and make recommendations to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Honorable Speaker, I'm delighted that Budget and Appropriations Committee has tabled its detailed report for consideration and adoption by this August House in accordance with Standing Order number 235-5, and I wish to commend the committees for their diligence in finalizing their work within the tight timeframes. I'm also happy that committee chairs and members have begun making their contributions on the floor of the House regarding the budget estimates. Honorable Speaker, today we welcome the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning as he makes a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the government for the fiscal year 2021-2022 in accordance with Standing Orders number 25A and 244C. Honorable Speaker, during the afternoon sitting of Tuesday next week, we shall have the following bills being read the first time. Number one, the Trustees' Perpetual Succession Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 23 of 2021. The Perpetuities and Accumulations Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 24 of 2021. And the Certified Managers Bill, National Assembly Bill number 26 of 2021. Honorable Speaker, we shall also continue consideration of the report on the budget estimates for the financial year 2021-2022 for the third and final allotted day. Once this is concluded, the House shall continue debate on the motion on the report of the Auditor General and the financial statements for the national government for the financial year 2017-2018. Honorable Speaker, members will recall that we amended the calendar of the House to hold evening sittings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays starting from next week until our next recess in July. As such, during the evening session of Tuesday, 15th of June 2021, that is the session beginning from 7 to 9:30 p.m., we have scheduled the following business for consideration. Number one, in the Committee of Supply, in accordance with the procedure provided for in Standing Order number 241. Two, the second reading of the Wakfu Bill, National Assembly Bill number 73 of 2019. And number three, a motion on the report of the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning on the inspection visits to ascertain the impact of revenue enhancement initiatives on revenue collection. Honorable Speaker, due to the tightness of the business for the week, I'm informed that there are no questions scheduled for response by Cabinet Secretaries next week. Honorable Speaker, the House Business Committee will reconvene on Tuesday, the 15th of June, 2021, to schedule the business for the rest of the week. I now wish to lay this statement on the table of the House. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 8, the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 4 of 2021, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to amend the National Government Constituencies Development Act 2015.
Next.
Order number 9, the Kenya Roads Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 13 of 2021, first reading. A bill for an act of Parliament to amend the Kenya Roads Act and for connected purposes.
That's all. General, honourable members, this is communication number 27 of 2021, which deals with interruption of business for delivery of the highlights of budget estimates for the financial year 2021-2022. Report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the budget estimates for the national government, Parliament, and the judiciary for the financial year 2021-2022. This process will proceed to the Committee of Supply, which will allocate funds to various votes and programs under the three arms of the national government. Ultimately, the process comes to an end upon the passage and enactment of the Annual Appropriations Act, which anchors the respective allocations in law and authorizes the attendant withdrawals from the consolidated fund. Honourable members, as part of this process, Section 40, Subsection 1 of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, read together with Standing Order 244, paragraph C, requires the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures of the national government. For this reason, I've shortly been interrupting business of the House to allow the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning to discharge this obligation. Honourable members, before I do so, allow me to recognize the following Cabinet Secretaries who are seated in the Speaker's row for this occasion, being led as of the time we are sitting, Mr. James Masharia, EGH Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Professor Margaret Kobia, EGH Cabinet Secretary for Public Service, Mrs. Cecily Kariuki, Cabinet Secretary for Water, and several other dignitaries. They are welcome to the National Assembly. Honourable members, I also wish to recognize the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, as well as representatives from the judiciary led by the Commissioner Evelyn Olwande, who's accompanied by the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, Mrs. Anne Amandi, and other judicial officers. And are pleased they are seated in the diplomatic boxes. Honourable members, seated at the public servants' benches are other distinguished guests from the National Treasury accompanying the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon. They include the Chief Administrative Secretary, National Treasury, the Honourable Nelson Gaishuye, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Planning, Mr. Eric Simiyu Wafuho, and the Principal Secretary, National Treasury, Dr. Julius Muya. Finally, may I also recognize our very own Mrs. Phyllis Macau, the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office, who is also seated at the public servants' benches. Please join me, members, in welcoming them to the National Assembly this afternoon in our usual manner. Honourable members, paragraph A of Standing Order 255, capital A provides as follows, and I quote, "The Speaker may designate a suitable place in the chamber or at the bar of the House for A, the Cabinet Secretary responsible for finance to make a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government as contemplated under the Public Finance Management Act," close the quotes. In furtherance of this provision, I have designated a suitable place to the right of Mr. Speaker's seat and adjacent to the public servants' benches to enable the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning to discharge his obligation under Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Standing Order 244C of the National Assembly Standing Orders. In this regard, honourable members, it is now my pleasure to invite the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning, the Honourable Ambassador Ukur Yatani, to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and the revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2021-2022 and the medium term, not later than 3:15 p.m. Bwana Cabinet Secretary, karibu.
Mr. Speaker, it is once again a privilege for me to present to this Honorable House and the people of Kenya highlights of the budget policy and the revenue-raising measures for the financial year 2021-22. This statement is a fulfillment of the requirement of Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act and the Standing Order Number 241 of the National Assembly. I do this in performing my fiduciary duty to Kenyans. Before I proceed with the rest of my statement, Mr. Speaker, allow me to state that during the preparation of this budget, I had very fruitful engagements with diverse stakeholders and received valuable feedback. The breadth of the stakeholders spanned from the government ministries, departments and agencies, county government, committees of this House, development partners, private sector, and Kenyans from all walks of life. I extend my sincere gratitude to them for their views and useful suggestions which inform the priorities of this budget. Mr. Speaker, pressing concerns raised by Kenyans during the consultation process revolved around the impact of COVID-19 and its containment measures. Kenyans were concerned about the high cost of COVID-19 treatment and availability of vaccines, in addition to food security, high cost of living, and employment levels among the youth. In addition, Kenyans raised concerns about the general levels of poverty and inequality, as well as increased public debt. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I wish to assure Kenyans that these concerns have been considered and I will be elaborating specific interventions later in this statement. Mr. Speaker, as you recall, following the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in March last year, the government instituted containment measures to curb the spread of the virus and save lives. To cushion Kenyans and businesses, the government rolled out specific fiscal interventions, including reduction of pay-as-you-earn and corporate tax from 30 to 25%, value-added tax from 16 to 14%, and turnover tax from 3 to 1%. The government also offered 100% tax relief to Kenyans earning below Kenya shilling 24,000 per month. In addition, the government enhanced cash transfer allocations to the vulnerable segment of the society, including the emerging urban vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the government further implemented various monetary policy measures to enhance access to credit by the private sector. These included reduction of the central bank rate from 8.25 to 7%, and lowering of the cash reserve ratio from 5.2 to 4.2%, thereby injecting an additional shilling 35 billion to the money market. Further, during this period, commercial banks were allowed flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and provisioning. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic activities in the country, the government implemented a comprehensive economic stimulus program targeting activities in infrastructure, education, health, business liquidity, agriculture and food security, tourism, manufacturing, environment, water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, in spite of these interventions, a lot remains to be done in order to deal with the challenges of unemployment among our youth, as well as high poverty and income equality levels that have been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our rallying call in this year's budget is therefore job creation through continued and sustained economic growth. To strengthen this position, we shall implement comprehensive economic recovery strategy that will expand economic activities and address these challenges. Mr. Speaker, the private sector remains key to employment creation and poverty reduction in the country. In order to expand the scope and pace of policy interventions and enhance access to credit by businesses, the government established the Credit Guarantee Scheme to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the plight of the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, remains a key concern for our government. In order to cushion this particular group, the government will enhance cash transfer allocations and institute other targeted interventions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered one of the worst health and economic crises of our time. The pandemic overstretched our health systems, and in line with the advisory of the World Health Organization, the government implemented appropriate interventions to save lives. The response has undoubtedly strengthened our healthcare system through provisioning of necessary medical supplies, installation of modern equipment, and deployment of more health personnel. In addition, in March 2021, the government launched the National COVID-19 Vaccination Program, initially targeting the frontline workers and other highly vulnerable groups. As at end of May 2021, about 1 million persons had received the first vaccine dose. In order to facilitate further rollout of vaccines to create herd immunity, we propose to allocate Kenya shilling 14.3 billion in the financial 2021-22. This is in addition to Kenya shilling 7.6 billion appropriated in the current budget. Mr. Speaker, to enhance access to affordable medical and equipment for management of COVID-19 and chronic diseases, I will later in this statement be proposing tax relief measures on the various pharmaceutical products and medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, the containment measures instituted by the government to stem the spread of the virus and save lives adversely affected economic activities and revenue performance. To stimulate economic activities and enhance government's ability to respond, we prioritized health and social expenditures and formulated an economic recovery strategy program that targeted, first, enhancing our ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, reducing debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation with a view to stabilizing debt to GDP ratio over the medium term. Third, implementing targeted policy, legal and institutional reforms, while at the same time addressing vulnerabilities in the state-owned enterprises worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And fourth, strengthening the monetary policy framework and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we plan to reduce the level of fiscal deficit from 8.7% of GDP in the current budget to 7.5% of GDP in the financial 2021-22, and further to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2024-25. This will be a 5.1% reduction in fiscal deficit over the next 4 years, thereby slowing the annual growth of debt. Upon our request, this economic recovery program is supported by multilateral and bilateral development partners, with the International Monetary Fund providing financial resources amounting to US dollars 2.34 billion over the next 3 years. Further, Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 countries extended support to developing countries by offering debt service suspension under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative framework. The fiscal space created under this initiative is to increase social, health, and economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya has benefited from this initiative through expansion of health and social services. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Kenya welcomes the initiatives under the recent French African Summit that agreed to, among others, increase funding through the IMF special drawing rights to African states to support economic recovery, extension of the G20 debt service suspension, and facilitate the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has been prepared against a backdrop of projected global economic recovery. This is despite the emergence of COVID-19 variant, occasioning reintroduction of containment measures to further stem spread of the virus. The projected recovery reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies and monetary easing that further uplifts the economic outlook. This outlook is further supported by the ongoing vaccinations, which is expected to pick up in the second half of 2021. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021 from a contraction of 3.3% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, closer home, due to improved exports and commodity prices, economic growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021 from a contraction of 1.9% in 2020. This growth will also be supported by recovery in both private consumption and investment as the economies reopen. Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the world, our economy was not spared from the adverse impact of the pandemic. In addition, the Kenyan economy experienced two other shocks. One, the invasion of the desert locusts that damaged crops, and two, floods that caused loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Given the impact of these shocks, economic growth for 2020 declined to 0.6% from 5.4% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is expected to rebound to 6.6% in 2021. This recovery reflects the lower base of 2020, when most services sectors were adversely affected by the closure of the economy, recording negative growth. The outlook in 2021 will be reinforced by the prevailing stable macroeconomic environment and the ongoing implementation of the strategic priorities of government under the Big Four agenda and economic recovery strategy. Weather conditions are expected to be favorable, supporting agricultural output. As a result, export of goods and services will expand as global demand normalizes. Over the medium term, the economy is expected to remain resilient and grow at a rate above 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, this growth outlook is affirmed by the recent surveys by the Monetary Policy Committee, revealing a general optimism about economic growth prospects. In addition, the recent IMF mission to Kenya noted that economic recovery is underway and estimates economic growth consistent with our projections. Mr. Speaker, to support this growth outlook, we shall continue to maintain macroeconomic stability. Inflation, which stood at 5.9% in May 2021, is expected to remain within the target range of 5%, with a margin of 2.5 on either side, supported by prudent fiscal and monetary policies. Interest rates will be expected to remain low and stable, supporting growth of private sector credit. The balance of payments is also expected to be strong, with the current account balance projected to remain at 5.2% of GDP. Further, the rebound in horticulture and tea exports, as well as increased inflows of remittances, will support build-up of adequate levels of official foreign exchange reserves, creating buffers against short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Speaker, the aforementioned economic outlook may be affected by emerging domestic and external risks. The emergence of new COVID-19 variants could lead to reinstatement of containment measures, disrupting, among others, trade and tourism. In addition, Mr. Speaker, adverse weather conditions could lead to low agricultural output. Further, increased public expenditure pressures, particularly wage demands, could put a strain to the fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to monitor these developments and take appropriate policy interventions to safeguard the economy where the risks to materialize. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, we have carefully reflected on a theme that will resonate with our strategies to protect lives and livelihoods during this period of COVID-19, cushion the vulnerable, and support economic recovery for employment creation and poverty reduction. In this respect, we have framed the theme for this budget as Building Back Better, a strategy for resilient and sustainable economic recovery and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section of my statement will give highlights of the policy priorities of the government and the strategy for economic recovery. I will later provide highlights of the fiscal framework underpinning the budget, spending priorities, and the proposed tax policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of Big Four agenda remains a high priority and critical to the economic recovery. In this regard, the government will fast-track implementation of programs and projects under the Big Four agenda to enhance food and nutritional security, achieve universal health care, provide affordable housing, and support growth of manufacturing sector for job creation. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to achieve a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. First, maintain a macroeconomic stability and enhance security to foster a secure and conducive business environment and security of Kenyans and their properties. Second, scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country such as roads, rail, energy, and water to reduce the cost of doing business and ease movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, stimulating tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. Fourth, expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. Fifth, support the youth, women, and persons living with disability through government-funded empowerment programs that leverages on partnerships with the private sector organization. Sixth, support county government through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. And lastly, implement various policy, legal, and institutional reforms to enhance efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, following the outbreak of the pandemic, we implemented the economic stimulus program to support economic activities and mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on Kenyans and businesses. The achievement of the program includes: 1, creation of over 100,000 jobs opportunities for the youth under the Kazi Mtaani initiative, and 5,500 community scouts in wildlife conservation areas across the 47 counties. 2, improvement of education outcomes through construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools, procurement of locally fabricated desks for both primary and secondary schools, and recruitment of 4,000 and 8,000 primary and secondary school intern teachers, respectively. 3, enhancement of healthcare system capacity by recruiting 5,000 diploma and certificate level healthcare workers for 1 year under the universal health coverage. 4, enhancement of liquidity to businesses through payment of VAT refunds of shilling 10 billion and clearance of pending bills of shilling 13.1 billion. 5, de-risking of lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises by providing shilling 3 billion to the Credit Guarantee Scheme as a seed capital. And 6, cushioning the vulnerable, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, with an additional shilling 10 billion to the cash transfer program. Mr. Speaker, building on the success of the aforementioned interventions, the government is now set to implement an elaborate economic recovery strategy that aims to reposition the economy on an inclusive and sustainable growth trajectory. The strategy seeks to enhance resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs from diverse sources, including public-private partnership and lease financing. The strategy will also support the role of the private sector in the economy and further facilitate credit access by micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under the strategy, the government will upscale investment in ICT and digital infrastructure in order to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. The government shall also promote local production processes and domestic supply value chains and strengthen social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly, successful implementation of this strategy will enable us realize the aspired economic growth, create employment, and narrow income inequalities. I will later in this statement propose budget allocations to the government priority areas. Mr. Speaker, besides the achievements under the economic stimulus program, the ongoing key strategic interventions of government, as well as sustained policy reforms over the years, have greatly transformed the economy and improved the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight some of the key achievements realized from these investments and reforms. Mr. Speaker, at the macroeconomic level, our prudent fiscal, monetary, and financial policies have resulted into fast, strong economic growth that averaged at 5.6% between 2013 and 2019. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed growth in the year 2020. The GDP per capita increased by an impressive 80.4% from Kenyan shilling 113,000 in 2013 to Kenyan shilling 204,000 in 2019. New jobs created by both the formal and the informal sector increased by 12%, from 755,000 in 2013 to 846,000 in 2019. Second, inflation rate has remained within target range, averaging 6.1%. Third, interest rates have declined while credit to the private sector increased. Lending rates declined from 17.3% in 2013 to 12% in 2020, while the central bank rate declined from 8.5% in 2013 to 7% in 2020. As a result, credit to the private sector increased from Kenyan shilling 1.5 trillion in 2013 to Kenyan shilling 2.8 trillion in 2020. Fourth, the current account deficit improved from 8.8% of GDP in 2013 to 4.7% of GDP in 2020, supporting the stability of the foreign exchange market. And fifth, revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, doubled from Kenyan shilling 900 billion in the financial 2013-2014 to an estimated Kenyan shilling 1.8 trillion in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, our investment in the expansion of road networks, railways, seaports, airports, and energy has enhanced domestic and regional connectivity, boosted rural productivity, and reduced urban congestion. These investments include: 1, the standard gauge railway and the urban commuter rail in Nairobi, the ongoing rehabilitation of meter gauge railway lines along various routes, including Nairobi-Nanyuki and Nakuru-Kisumu-Butere. 2, the recently launched first batch in Lamu Port as a critical pillar of the Lapsset corridor. Our focus to make Lamu a free port for both domestic and transshipment purposes. In addition, the government is establishing a disease-free zone in Lamu to support export of live animals and processed meat. 3, the rehabilitation and subsequent use of Kisumu Port will enhance efficiency in regional trade. And 4, expansion in energy generation and connectivity, with over 7.5 million households today connected to electricity compared to 2.3 million households in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has provided various incentives at our ports, including exempting the fuel supply to the shipping lines from import and excise duty, VAT, as well as railway development levy and import declaration fees. To further attract more ships to our ports, particularly to the recently launched Lamu Port, the government will review the arrangements on fueling by vessels calling at the Kenyan ports, with a view to allowing ship-to-ship refueling and establishment of fuel bunker facilities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the various reforms in the agricultural sector, we focused on the livestock sector by reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. We shall set up a meat processing plant in Lamu to provide ready market for livestock, increase income to farmers, and enhance the meat value chain. Mr. Speaker, we also focused on increasing fish production by refurbishing Liwatoni Fishing Complex and setting up a new fish processing plant in Lamu. This will promote exports and increase income for the local fishermen. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve access to land as a factor for development, we have stepped up investment in the sector and rolled out ambitious national program of land titling and digitization of land records. Mr. Speaker, tea and coffee subsectors provide livelihoods to millions of Kenyans. Despite its contribution, the foreign exchange earnings, the returns to farmers have been declining due to low productivity, high input cost, low levels of value addition, and weak regulatory and institutional framework. Under the ongoing reforms in the coffee and tea sectors, I'll be proposing further measures to enhance competitiveness of these subsectors. With regard to manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, the government has revived and transformed textile, leather, and automobile industries, which have in turn created jobs for our youth. The full operationalization of special economic zones in Dongokundu, Naivasha, and Kisumu will support local industries, industrial activities, and unlock additional employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has supported local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles by providing various tax incentives. This includes removal of excise duty on locally assembled motor vehicles, duty-free importation of complete knockdown kits, and reduced corporate tax from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years of operation. I am pleased to note that the industry has responded positively to these interventions, and to date, we have approved 13 motor vehicle and 17 motorcycle assemblers. These local assemblers have created employment opportunities while also saving the country substantial foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, whereas assembly of commercial vehicles have registered tremendous growth, the passenger category of motor vehicles remains underdeveloped. This category is still dominated by imported used vehicles, comprising over 70% of passenger vehicles, which is largely attributed to the high cost of assembly. In this regard, the government is working on a framework to support the assembly of affordable passenger vehicles. Further, the government, in consultation with the stakeholders, is in the final stages of instituting comprehensive policy and administrative reforms to fully entrench local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, while we have made tremendous progress as a nation, we remain alive to the structural constraints that impair the pace of economic development, aware that a resilient and sustainable economic recovery is indeed predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms. I propose the following interventions to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen accountability and transparency in public finance management. On procurement, Mr. Speaker, this House approved the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulation 2020 that came into effect in July 2020. With this regulation, it's now easier for procuring entities to meet the specified requirements of bilateral and knowledge transfer, local content, and employment quotas, among others. For smooth implementation of the regulations, we have conducted capacity building in all 47 counties. I therefore direct procuring entities to fully comply with these regulations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure efficiency in procurement process and facilitate access by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has reviewed consolidation policy on procurement of ICT equipment and related services. In this regard, procurement of ICT equipment and related services will be decentralized to various ministries, departments, and agencies with effect from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, last year, we began the process of automating public procurement through an end-to-end electronic procurement system. So far, we have developed an implementation strategy that re-engineers all public procurement processes, including functional and technical requirements. In order to actualize this initiative, 31st December 2021 will be the final date for rolling out the electronic government procurement system and therefore discontinuation of the manual procurement processes. In this regard, the government will realize savings as a result of greater efficiency, reduce operational costs, enhance transparency and accountability through increased bidding participation. Mr. Speaker, to support our local contractors and undertake construction of infrastructure projects, we have proposed changes to the contracting framework through the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Bill 2020. The bill before this House proposes, among others, to allow award of contract to multiple bidders. This indeed will support local firms and accelerate the delivery of services. Mr. Speaker, given the prevailing business environment due to the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there's an urgent need to evaluate the financial position and governance of key state corporations and institutions. It is in this respect that the government is exploring targeted reforms to strengthen these institutions, including public universities. Mr. Speaker, in the interim, the government provided financial support to strategic institutions, including Kenya Airways, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, and Postal Corporations of Kenya, which were indeed in dire need of cash to meet critical obligations. Mr. Speaker, we have developed a robust information management system to strengthen the statutory role of the National Treasury in financial and operational oversight, as well as the financial risk analysis for state corporations. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the government introduced cost sharing in public universities in the year 1991. At that time, government funding to public universities per year was set at Kenyan shilling 120,000 per student. Of these, government capitation per student was Kenyan shilling 70,000, while students contributed Kenyan shilling 50,000 through loan funding from Higher Education Loans Board, out of which Kenyan shilling 16,000 catered for tuition fees. This is less than half of tuition fees paid currently by students in various colleges of technical and vocational education and training institutions. The ideal cost of training a student in a university has increased from Kenyan shilling 120,000 to about Kenyan shilling 200,000 per year, and therefore the prevailing funding arrangement introduced in 1991 is unsustainable. Under the current arrangement, universities have not only experienced financial constraints, but have also been unable to continuously honor their statutory obligations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure sustainability and self-reliance of public universities, the Ministry of Education is expected to engage stakeholders beginning July 2021 with a view to addressing this matter. Mr. Speaker, delays in payment of pending bills to businesses who provide services to both national and county government has affected liquidity and operation of these entities. In a number of cases, this has led to closure of businesses and affected livelihoods of the suppliers. Though progress was made in settlement of these bills by the national government, we still have challenges with the county government that still owe various suppliers huge amounts. In this regard, I direct government ministries, departments and agencies, and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to support our efforts towards enforcing compliance in payment of all verified pending bills by the county government by backing our proposal under Article 225 of the Constitution of Kenya to temporarily stop transfers to county government that persistently fail to comply with the directive to clear pending bills. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector has remained stable and continued to make significant contributions to the economic growth. Our commercial banks continue to expand their businesses to the neighboring markets, including recent acquisitions in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Uganda. The continued regional expansion will leverage on the trade and investment opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Kenyan banking sector continued on its transformation journey that commenced 5 years ago, where the key pillar of the journey has been the strengthening of banks' business models, governance frameworks, and entrenching customer centricity in the operations. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, the banking sector moved quickly to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on staff, customers, and the public, and instituted emergency measures to support business continuity, use of digital channels to mitigate COVID-19 infection risk, enhance liquidity to businesses, as well as facilitate compliance with health and safety protocols. As a result, banks continue to provide uninterrupted banking services to customers mainly through digital channels. Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year, more than 54% of the bank loans, equivalent to Kenyan shillings 1.7 trillion, were restructured to enable borrowers navigate through the hard time due to the pandemic. As we move to the recovery phase, the banking sector will be expected to play a pivotal role in supporting the recovery of enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic recovery, additional capital investments are required. In this regard, the recently established Nairobi International Financial Center Authority will play an important role and is expected to publish, before end of December 2021, a framework for attracting investments and innovative financial services into our economy and the region. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of mortgages, land acquisition, and housing unit has limited access to affordable housing. Nevertheless, government interventions are beginning to yield the desired results for affordable housing. Significant progress has been made to enhance efficiency, transparency, and certainty in land matters by re-engineering the land registration processes, digitization of land records, and implementation of the Sectional Properties Act. The government is also in the process of streamlining and simplifying the legal and regulatory process governing the housing sector and providing basic infrastructure services to developers. Further, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is supporting the growth of residential housing market in Kenya by providing long-term funding to the mortgage lenders in order to increase affordability of mortgage loans to Kenyans. As of December 2020, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company had refinanced 1,400 affordable housing loans worth Kenya shilling 2.75 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is scheduled to issue an infrastructure bond by October 2021 to raise additional financing for its affordable housing finance objectives. Consequently, the company plans to issue green bonds to finance climate-friendly housing projects. Mr. Speaker, during the current financial year, the government operationalized the Credit Guarantee Scheme by providing seed capital of shilling 3 billion to de-risk lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. To this effect, the National Treasury signed credit guarantee agreements with 7 commercial banks who have now rolled out credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to further promote access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has committed to progressively raise the capital to shilling 10 billion. In this budget, I propose to allocate an additional shilling 2 billion to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, alongside the credit guarantee scheme, on account of improved business environment, the private sector has rolled out other innovative credit products targeting micro, small, and medium enterprises. Through these innovations, the banking sector had disbursed over shilling 20.8 billion to micro, small, and medium enterprises, equivalent to 0.7% of total gross loans by end of April 2021. Mr. Speaker, in order to unlock the full potential of digital lenders, the government has, through the Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Bill 2021, proposed to provide for licensing of digital credit service providers. This bill has been submitted to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a critical role of channeling national savings and foreign capital inflows into the productive sectors. In order to enhance inclusivity and access to investment opportunities in the capital markets, I propose to amend the Central Depository Act to allow for opening of omnibus investment accounts by persons investing on behalf of others in the securities market. This will allow investment by individuals as well as collective investment by groups. Further, to improve efficiency in our capital markets and ensure fair administrative actions by the Capital Markets Authority, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to enable the Capital Markets Tribunal to hear and determine any appeal within 90 days. Mr. Speaker, following the Kenya Bankers Association and other industry players, we shall establish an electronic over-the-counter secondary market platform for government securities. This platform will help in deepening our domestic debt market, improve pricing efficiency and transparency in securities trading, thereby lowering yields and cost of credit in the economy. We expect the operations of the over-the-counter to be in place by June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the defined benefit pension scheme for civil servants, teachers, and disciplined forces has constrained growth of pension savings and also exerted fiscal pressure on government. In order to address these twin problems, the government on 1st of January 2021 rolled out the much-awaited public service superannuation scheme that covers civil servants, teachers, and the disciplined forces aged below 45 years at the commencement of the scheme, with an option for those over 45 years to join if they elect to do so. As of April 2021, a total of 340,318 public servants had indeed joined the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the processing of payment of pension benefits to retired public servants has neither been efficient nor timely, thus denying senior citizens regular incomes. To address this, National Treasury has carried out targeted reforms including systems reengineering and the provision of real-time pension services in all the Huduma centers countrywide. I'm pleased to note